A central element of leading through times of change is mapping and framing the set of challenges and opportunities in front of you. Here is part of a conversation in which I was asked, how do I organize my thoughts and my mind around the unfolding story of the coronavirus pandemic? And where I propose 6 elements of the story and why this represents, along the extraordinary devastation and impact on all of us, also a profound developmental and possibly an evolutionary opportunity. For several decades, I've been walking in 2 worlds, with one foot in one world and the other foot in another world. And I've had one foot in the business world, in the coaching and consulting space, and with my focus primarily on helping clients improve their business results. And what I've done there is I developed a strategic consultancy and practically reinvented in a way the idea of strategy development by building a practice that is centered on strategic innovation, enabled by the approach of creating new futures, creating new business future, creating new organizational future, and so on. And this work enabled me to develop a successful and lucrative consulting practice. So I've had one foot in this world, and parallel to that, I've had a foot in a whole other world for all those decades. And this other foot has always been based in an inquiry that is more metaphysical, spiritual, developmental, evolutionary in nature, and one that inquires about the core mysteries of life. Why are we humans here on earth, and what is the meaning of purpose and soul and spirit and the higher human potential? And part of that exploration has always involved also the practical search of the kind of states and processes and practices that enable us to activate and unleash the higher human faculties. And on the other end of that second inquiry, there has been an aspect of, for example, exploring the end of days theologies that you can find in all world religions and all world faith, where different theological streams inquire about the future of humanity, the future of the world. And it's very interesting and compelling to see how those narratives have been framed in different streams, different theological streams. And it is so important and fascinating because those, unbeknown to most people, permeate so much of people's beliefs, even if they treat themselves or hold themselves to not be religious or spiritual at all, because those are being auto-suggested from the collective tendencies and the collective memory of humanity. So I say that because those 2 worlds, those 2 dimensions that in me have always been fused, but largely were kept separate, I now recognize that this threefold epidemic that we are discussing, the coronavirus epidemic, the stock market and economic meltdown epidemic, and the viral nature of that, and the panic and fear and anxiety epidemic, that this scenario, I now read it to be one that represents a clarion call, asking me to bring those 2 worlds in me into integration, at least in the voice that I bring in terms of what I share, because, and one important aspect of this is the appreciation that there is no sufficient kind of resilience strategy in the business space without some kind of a mental, emotional, behavioral, spiritual aspects that are integrated. And in the same way, on the other side of the equation, to inquire merely at this as from a spiritual or metaphysical point of view without actually bringing to the table pragmatic and practical ways and means and response strategies and responsibility is amateurish and not serious and totally insufficient. So with this video and with perhaps next future videos that I'm looking to record, my intent is to look to try to find, to bring the emergence of those two backgrounds and experiences, the pragmatic, practical coaching experience and working with senior executives all around the world, and the more metaphysical, developmental, evolutionary, spiritual inquiry that has always been central to my own personal journey. And today, what I'd like to do is to focus on 6 dimensions of the event that's underway. Again, the premise being that we need to actually build a response strategy that's inclusive of those various dimensions, rather than think that if we're going to produce one dimension of response, that it's going to be sufficient. The first dimension to highlight, this is a global event. It's happening globally all at the same time. There is a profound significance in that it's probably the first time that we are experiencing such a global event. The stock market collapse in 2008 impacted many people, but was not as global an event, and it had a narrower time kind of an experience. The event of 9/11 was something that resonated and chain reacted globally, but it was a one-day event, and many people outside the US viewed it from the distance with an impact and response, but still, it was not something that we all experienced in the same way. I'll be revealing my age if I'll say that the one time I can trace to in my childhood where there was an event, global event, was the Apollo 11 landing on the moon, and then the Apollo 13, and that these were experiences that people experienced globally. People were watching these on televisions all around the world. But this is something we are experiencing in the individual way, in the personal way. So these are the first 2 dimensions, the global personal event. This is the first global personal event of its kind, in a way that where each person is experiencing it in a personal way, all while it's happening globally. And there is profound significance in that we are building for the first time a shared personal global experience. So these are dimension 1 and dimension 2. Dimension 3, this is a geopolitical event. We don't yet know how it will recast the geopolitical landscape. But one thing we know, when we come on the other side of this event, whenever that is, whether it's 2 months, 4 months, or 6 or 8 months or a year, I don't know that we will immediately know, but it will be something that will have catalyzed and accelerated a recasting of the geopolitical landscape. The power balances, the place of China and India and Russia and Europe and the United States, and the way each of these countries developed their response, and where there was a good coherent response and ability to collaborate, and where there wasn't, and what were the impacts, all those will change in some way the balance of power globally. So it's a geopolitical event, and we need to be attuned to that. And because, why? Because it will impact us in a personal way. The 4th dimension, which I mentioned earlier, is an economic one, because each person is impacted in a profound way. How it impacts your work. Some people are actually working in companies that are thriving through this time. Some companies are out of business, and many people have lost their work, and many more will lose their work. Some people were just at the early stage of their retirement and are seeing and or will see evaporation of significant amount of their savings which they planned on for their retirement, how will that impact them practically, financially, in their psychology, in what they will be able to do is significant. But it also is an economic event in a whole other way, because many people were expecting that something will happen and was about to happen in the economy, because we were at the end of the longest expansion cycle in history. This was about 10-year bull market run, partly extended because of the policies that were enacted. And so many people were expecting that something will happen. And one of the important things to recognize about extended cycles, a new cycle in the economy often appears with new innovation, and the late stage of the cycle is often characterized more by driving efficiency to maximize the capture of value out of that cycle that was initially created. And so because of that, many companies in the last several years, their focus was taking cost out of the system to drive the highest level of efficiency. This is what Nissim Taleb described in his anti-fragility framework, the scenario that leads to highly efficient organizations that are also highly fragile. Highly fragile because all their redundancies were taken out of the system. So I'm saying this is an economic event because there will be the debrief inquiries where people will say, well, hold on a minute, why were we not better prepared? And some of the answer would have to be a reflection on how we have, in many systems, taken all the cost out of the system, reduced the natural redundancies, and created highly fragile systems. I have never seen one orange tree saying to the other orange tree, you must be more efficient. Why are you generating so many flowers to create so much less in terms of number of orange fruit on your tree? Nature has tremendous amount of redundancy. In modern economy, we try to take all that redundancy out of the system to drive the highest level of efficiency. What the large cycles prove is that sometimes what appears to be very efficient on the front end will appear to be very costly because we were not necessarily best prepared to this or to any other situation. It's not so easy argument to make because people will quickly say back to that, well, if we follow your proposal, we will have to build preparedness to 70 different scenarios. How can that be efficient? So I'm suggesting a principle to reflect on rather than a specific strategy. So that's the economic effect and dimension number 4 after global, personal, and geopolitical. The 5th dimension of the event is profound social. It's a profound social event. Never in the history of evolution has there been a species that needed to change its behavioral and social code in a matter of like overnight. In a matter of weeks, globally, we have learned to reprogram how we behave with each other. We now have learned to respect the space of the other person. Most people are not sensitized to the energy field of other people, but guess what? We now are actually practically trained to stand in an auric distance. That's the energy field distance twice from the other person, which is the practice of social distancing. So something in that behavioral experience is being rewired, and I am fascinated with what will that do to us in the future. Will we completely forget it? Or will we actually recognize that you don't end where your body ends, but that in fact you have a space around you where energetically all your processes also If you sneeze, you also impact that space, but that's not the only thing. Energetically, you actually expand beyond that. So that's a fascinating point of view of will that enter more of human awareness? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that we were able to rewire our behavior in a profound way, and we are now respectful of each other's space in a whole new way. And finally, I would say the sixth dimension is this integration of all those different layers of process and awareness inside the meaning-making, spiritual, metaphysical event that we each make it to be. In that we are each a spiritual being inside the human experience. We are not, as so many times we fail to recognize, we think that we are human beings seeking the spiritual experience. In actuality, we are spiritual beings participating in the human experience, and how we are each choosing to take this opportunity that we are isolated, or we were guided and chosen to enter the cocoon of self-isolation. Like caterpillars, we entered our homes to be largely cocoon, and the question is, well, will we come out of these cocoons more as butterflies? In which case, the question is, how will we use this time of metamorphosis? How will we transform ourselves? By reflection about what matters most to us, by dialogue and conversation with the people we love, by making some important decisions in terms of what we will support going forward, where will we allocate the most precious assets of our life, and those include our time, our energy, and our mental focus, and how will we take the totality of this experience to make and establish through it the meaning that we will choose to ascribe to it. And particularly and most critically, what I addressed in my last podcast episode about tackling fear head on and not letting fear and anxiety and panic actually shape our mind. Instead, resist that and actually break out of it to a whole other different kind of mental space that we can choose to create for ourselves. So what am I saying? I'm saying that we ought to reflect on these 6 dimensions, and we've got to then inside it decide where we choose to focus. Are we still negotiating with the past? You have many people now talking about when will we come back to normal. There is no normal in the way we have known it that we are coming back to, because some things will change forever. Which of those things will change and which will return, we don't know yet. We can confidently say that there is a bright future ahead. It's going to be a different future though. And the shift, the pivot of resilience is the one when we choose to no longer look backward and negotiate with the past, but rather when we choose to focus on the future and discover the new future that's emerging, rather than still in our mind negotiating what are we losing that we used to have in the past. As a young CEO that I spoke with this week said to me, I have decided that instead of looking at this as a problem, I am seeing this situation as a new change of the landscape, and by leaning and embracing the new landscape, rather than by seeing it as a temporary problem right there in that pivot, he said, I become more resilient, more entrepreneurial, more able to discover the opportunities that are available for me to shape events and take control of the situation. When people talk about the world coming back to normal, the simple answer is it's not coming back, it's going forward. And the sooner we are able to engage with that mindset, the more resilient and agile we will be. One example that's a proof point is in our neighborhood. I've seen this week people stop during their afternoon walk and having a conversation from the two sides of the road, so they respect of the street, so they can respect the distance from each other. But people that have never spoken to each other, speaking with each other, including acts of kindness and including moments of generosity and new relationships developed in a neighborhood with people that have lived next to each other for many, many years. So I'm proposing that this crisis is potentially, while it is challenging and is causing cataclysmic economic impacts and death rates that are shocking all around the world, it is also potentially a generational birthing experience of a global personal experience, where we can discover the multifaceted human, the multifaceted experience of human life, and we can be inclusive of those 5 or 6 or 7 different dimensions of how we are experiencing that time. And inside it, we can recognize that each one of us, we are not one thing. Actually, we are each a multifaceted human, and that we are called to attend to the multidimensional experience of life and build specific strategies to address each of the different situations in which we participate and play in, and discover that we each may have a dozen different roles we participate in, and each of those roles require different response from us. And to enable that, we need to develop some meta strategies such that will enable us to participate in a productive and constructive way in each of the roles, and at the same time provide us with a core center of gravity where we shape our environment, we shape our sense of resilience, and where we become leaders to ourselves and to the people around us, where we can take care of our health, we can take care of our minds and our spirits and our souls, and we can shape that universal personal experience. And in some way, when we do that, we already help and are taking care of the world around us. And that's my invitation in this message today.